Welcome to the channel. Today, we're exploring some unbelievable story. Stay tuned and let's dive in. When the doorbell rang, they had just completed their supper. Sophia, the 13-year-old, rushed up to answer the door before her father or brother could rise, but she swiftly returned to the dining room with a puzzled expression. "It's a cop, Dad. He wants to talk to you," daughter said. Daniel felt a flash of terror, but he attempted to disguise it from his children. When he got to the door, he discovered that the caller was a Texas state trooper. "Are you Daniel Adams?" the trooper inquired. "Yes," Daniel said. "Are you the husband of Olivia Adams?" When Daniel nodded, the officer turned to the two youngsters and said, "May I speak with you in private, Mr. Adams?" Daniel's throat constricted and he had to clear it before speaking. "Liam, Sophia, please go to your rooms. I need to speak with the officer alone." Both children started to object, but when their father yelled, "Now!" at them, they jumped and rushed to comply. They were unused to hearing that tone of speech. After the children had left the room, the officer returned to their father. "Mr. Adams, I've been asked to give you some bad news. Your wife's airplane is missing and presumed down. It dropped off the radar tonight approximately halfway between Houston International Airport and Austin. A Coast Guard ship is in the area now looking for survivors." The facts were plain enough. Olivia, as regional sales VP for a huge international firm, had planned a visit to their headquarters in Mexico with the region's chief financial officer. She was a seasoned small aircraft pilot, so the 180-minute trip to Monterrey should have been straightforward. As a consequence, Daniel had missed Olivia's phone call informing him of her intentions. He was now distressed. It had to be his greatest nightmare. His wife's jet crashed at night in shark-infested seas off the coast of Mexico. Daniel was not encouraged by the officer's new revelations. Before leaving, he assured that the Coast Guard would call in the morning or sooner if there was any fresh information. No sooner had the trooper's door closed behind him than Liam and Sophia raced to his side, anxious expressions on their faces, demanding questions that their father could not answer. Daniel knew they'd been listening. He would have eavesdropped if he had been in their shoes. The three of them held to one another, each attempting to find something positive to say to the others. Sophia started to weep, and despite his attempts to be stoic, Liam's eyes became crimson as well. Daniel tried to remain calm for the sake of his children, but on the inside he was crazy. There was no notion of washing the dishes or completing schoolwork. Their misery kept the three of them close together for the remainder of the evening. It got beyond the children's customary bedtime, but no phone call arrived. Finally, weary by the late hour and their worries, all three went to the master bedroom, where the children slept alongside their father for the first time since they were little and scared of thunderstorms. They were awake and about to have breakfast the following morning when a Coast Guard official phoned. The modest optimism sparked by the call was swiftly destroyed when the officer informed Daniel that the cutter checking the area had discovered nothing. Daniel phoned the administrator of the kids' middle school to explain why Liam and Sophia would be missing that day. He then went to check on the two of them, only to find them sitting in front of the television, watching a CNN article on the missing airliner. Daniel wasn't sure whether to let them stay watching or turn off the television, but before he could decide, the phone rang again. From that moment on, whenever Daniel hung up on one call, another one came in. Not unexpectedly, the first calls came from Olivia's parents and his own. Everyone was frantic with fear, but they were still attempting to present a false hope that she would magically be discovered. Daniel promised to call back as soon as he had any news. Then followed the calls from their friends and co-workers. Everyone wanted to speak or do something to assist, but they didn't know how. The chats were brief and unpleasant. The most tough calls were from the media. Daniel should have anticipated them, but he was taken off guard when the first reporter called. He spoke with the reporter from the Dallas Morning News for far longer than he intended to. Then representatives from other media began calling, and Daniel recognized what was going on, so he started filtering all the calls and returned only those from individuals he cared about. During all of this bustle, a parade of neighbors and friends started, each arriving at their door bearing condolences and food. Their generosity was first welcomed since Daniel lacked the energy to prepare meals, but soon, he and his children had more food than they could possibly consume in 1 week. It was an ancient Southern practice to convey concern and sorrow via food, but although Daniel appreciated the gesture, each roast and casserole served as a cruel reminder that his wife of 20 years was very definitely gone. The following several days were abysmal. The Adams family were virtual captives in their own house, trapped there by their wish not to interact with anyone and their hope for news from the Coast Guard. Daniel called the Houston office on a regular basis for updates, but the reports were always negative. Then, 6 days after the Texas State Trooper knocked on their home, they received the news they dreaded. A Coast Guard officer phoned to inform Daniel that debris from his wife's jet had been discovered. There was no evidence of any survivors. "I'm sorry, sir," said the cop, "but we're going to have to cease search and rescue operations at this time." Daniel wanted nothing more than to hide away and grieve alone, but that choice was not accessible. Instead, he was presented with a seemingly never-ending list of tasks, many of which were terrible. The saddest part, of course, was having to give Liam and Sophia the bad news and attempt to soothe them. When things had finally settled down, he had to call family and close friends to inform them. Next, they called their church to schedule a memorial service, followed by a call to the local newspaper to submit an obituary. Then additional calls came in to share the service time and date. Daniel was physically and emotionally weary at the end. The family made it through the funeral and started the tedious, agonizing process of attempting to resume their usual lives. The kids returned to school the next week, and a return to their normal schedule seemed to help a bit. Daniel wasn't as lucky. A whole new set of responsibilities rested on his shoulders. Daniel called an attorney at the suggestion of a friend to learn more about his legal duties. He was surprised to find that he would have to apply for a death certificate. But her plane crashed at sea. He complained. "How can there be any doubt?" "I know," the lawyer said with regret, "but in the absence of a body and a physician's certificate, the court must make a formal declaration." "Am I going to have to wait 7 years?" Daniel questioned, distressed. "No," the lawyer assured him. "In a case like this, where an individual has been lost at sea, there's usually no significant delay. You may have to answer some questions, but typically such cases are resolved very quickly. I can get the petition started for you." The lawyer kept going. "I can also help you get all your other documents changed. You know, like any joint bank accounts, your mortgage, your insurance, car titles, your will, anything like that. While I do that, you need to contact your wife's company to see about any benefits to which you may be entitled, as well as to claim any personal belongings." Daniel shook his head in fatigue. In his sadness, he hadn't considered how difficult it would be to untie the life he and his wife had created. He was now confronted with another terrible task: phoning the widow of Paul Morgan, the financial professional who had been on the aircraft with Olivia. Daniel had only met Claire a few times at his wife's work parties, but he had developed an initial hatred for the executive. Daniel saw Taylor as one of those pompous types who believed he was wiser than everyone else. Taylor had dropped enough names and boasted about his successes in the little time Daniel had been with him to leave a nasty taste in Daniel's mouth. But it was not Claire's fault, Daniel told himself. He felt obligated to call on her. Daniel had called ahead, so Anna Morgan was expecting him. As they shared condolences, Daniel realized she was perhaps the only one who fully understood how he felt. When they were sat in her living room, she sweetly inquired, "So how are you doing now, Daniel?" "It's hard, Claire," Daniel said. "It's quite hard. I simply can't comprehend that she's really gone. So many things remind me of her," he murmured, shaking his head sadly. "Do you know what the toughest thing is?" He continued. "When I'm out on the street or in a throng, I keep thinking I saw her. The other day, I must have terrified this poor lady half to death when I chased her down because I mistook her for Olivia." He glanced down, reliving the scene and the feelings that had followed. Claire looked at him sympathetically. She realized there were no words to assist. Finally, he glanced up to her. "And how are you, Claire? How are you doing?" "It's not easy, Daniel," she said gently. "But I am going to make it. The reality is, I am probably doing a lot better than you. John and I did not have children, so I do not have two to comfort as you do. Also, and I wouldn't say this to anybody else, but John and I didn't get along very well before anything occurred. I'd caught him having a few affairs in the past, and I believe he was in the midst of another. If this hadn't occurred, we'd definitely be divorcing soon. I'm very sorry to hear that, Claire, Daniel remarked gently. I can only imagine the conflicting emotions you must be feeling. Yes, she said. 1 minute, I'm pleased that I don't have to deal with his infidelity anymore, and the next, I'm plagued with guilt for not feeling sadder. And, despite everything, a part of me still misses him. Will you be all right financially? Daniel inquired, attempting to divert the topic. I'm not sure, she said. The good news is that the firm offered life insurance for John, and since he died while on work, he'll get double the face value under the double indemnity provision. The bad news is that I'm going to need every bit of that money since I discovered John made a series of disastrous stock market bets that significantly eroded our net worth. Claire's remarks regarding her late spouse did not surprise Daniel. It didn't take much imagination for him to assume that an egotist like Paul Morgan would not be a devoted spouse. That Taylor would believe himself a wheeler-dealer in the market was totally consistent with Daniel's mental image of the guy. Claire mentioned the company paid life insurance, which piqued Daniel's interest. He recalled his attorney's instructions and made a mental note to contact Olivia's company's benefits department immediately. If Taylor had been insured, Olivia would have had a comparable coverage. And until Daniel can find work, those monies may be quite useful. After a few more minutes of conversation, Daniel got from the sofa. Please forgive me, Claire, but I'll have to cut my stay short. Liam and Sophia will be out of school shortly, and I need to go pick them up. But please remain in contact. And if there's anything I can do to assist, even if you just need a sympathetic ear to vent, please don't hesitate to contact me. When Daniel arrived home after picking up Liam and Sophia, he was shocked to discover a vehicle parked in front. He brought his children inside the home via the garage, and the doorbell rang a minute later. Outside were a guy in his 50s and a younger lady, both dressed professionally. I'm Special Agent James Hall, he said, and this is Special Agent Natalie White. We are with the Texas Bureau of Investigation. We would want to come in and ask you a few questions about your wife's absence. Sophia hid her face in her father's side after realizing the two were law enforcement agents. Daniel could feel her tears wetting his shirt and hugged her firmly. What is this about? He demanded fiercely. Before the first agent could speak, Agent White intervened. Mr. Adams, I'm sorry we disturbed your daughter. All we're attempting to do is do a normal check in conjunction with your request for Mrs. Adams' death certificate. If you want us to come back later, we may endeavor to do so at a time that is more convenient for you. Daniel ignored her and went to look at his daughter. It's okay, honey. Nothing awful has occurred. The female agent quickly knelt down on one knee, grabbed into her handbag for a tissue, and offered it to Sophia. Here, honey, she said gently. Sophia paused, but then timidly took the tissue, wiping her tears and blowing her nose. When Daniel saw his daughter had calmed down, he wrapped his arm around her and talked to her quietly. These individuals need to chat to me for a long about your mother. Sophia, why don't you go start your homework? I'll be right out in the living room if you need me. He gently pulled his 13-year-old daughter toward her room. Then he turned and faced the cops. If it won't take too long, let's get this over with. The three of them entered the living area and took their seats around a coffee table. We just need a little background information on your wife, Mr. Adams, the male agent said. How long were you two married? We got married in 2002, right after we both graduated from the University of Texas, Daniel said, recalling the lovely brunette co-ed he had wooed and won so many years before. And she was employed by Global Commerce Ventures until her disappearance, Daniel informed me. Agent White looked at him and said she was sales vice president for the southwestern United States. If a region was the Southwest, why would she have traveled to Mexico? At IMC, Daniel added, the Southwest covers Mexico and Central America. Olivia often flew to Monterrey, which serves as their regional headquarters. Olivia, Agent White inquired. Daniel felt his voice get hoarse. Olivia was my pet name for her. Agent White leaned across the table and touched his palm, kindly. That's okay, Mr. Adams. I realize this is difficult for you. The senior agent decided to alter the course of inquiry. Was it usual for your wife to fly her own aircraft for business trips? Yes, Daniel said. Olivia's father was a pilot, and she received her license as soon as she was old enough. She seized every chance to travel alone because she said it gave her independence from commercial airline scheduling. She used to boast she could travel to where she wanted to be, do her business, and return home while the competition was still stopped in the airport. She thought that provided her an advantage, particularly when she was starting out. The two agents took notes. Then Agent White glanced up at him. "And how about you, Mr. Adams? What are you doing?" Daniel managed a grin. "I'm a house husband." Seeing their shocked glances, he said, "I was an aerospace engineer until 4 years ago, when my company cut back and I was laid off. The only opportunities one could discover for a new work would have forced me to move out of state, but Olivia's employment was going well. She'd had a couple of large promotions and was earning a good salary plus significant bonuses. It didn't make sense for her to stop, so we decided that I'd run the home and care for the kids while she worked." Agent White nodded attentively. "And how did this change affect your relationship with Mrs. Adams? Why is that relevant?" Daniel inquired, agitated. "Please bear with us, Mr. Adams," Agent White said. "We're required to check to see if there could be any factors that might have played a role in your wife's disappearance. It's all routine." Daniel stared at the two of them, somewhat relieved. Sure, it was a significant transition for me, but I am an engineer. I've been taught to measure and evaluate all aspects of a design. It was clear that my shifting jobs was the best decision for our family at the moment. I led Olivia to focus on her profession, and I ensured that Liam and Sophia always had a parent available to them." Neither agent spoke, and Daniel had the impression that the matter remained unanswered. "I don't mean it was easy," Daniel said. "She was usually calling on clients or attending company meetings, so I didn't get to see her as frequently as I wanted to. Sometimes it felt like her job came first," he said, before realizing what he was saying. He immediately added, "But that's very normal in business life. Besides, it worked great till now." "Just 2 more questions, Mr. Adams," Agent Banks said. "Did you notice any changes in your wife's behavior in the time prior to her disappearance?" "Not really," Daniel said after a minute of thought. "I know she was under a lot of pressure in the last year or so, and her travel schedule was heavier than ever, but Olivia said she was in line for a major promotion. When she got it, she promised the new job would cut down on her travel and come with a high-level title and a big bump in her salary." "Last question," Agent Banks said, jotting something on his pad. "Do you know whether your wife has made any modifications to your money in the recent several months?" "No," Daniel said with assurance. "I keep up with all our finances and I haven't seen anything out of the ordinary." The young lady looked at her lover. "I think we've taken enough of your time, Mr. Adams. We should be able to wrap this up pretty quickly, and we'll let you know as soon as we've concluded. In the meantime, if you think of anything you feel we should know, please call me at this number." As she talked, she gave him her card, and the two agents walked towards the door. Daniel returned to his children's bedrooms to ensure they were doing their schoolwork. When he glanced inside their chambers, both seemed to be quite occupied. "They are strong kids," he observed. "They've been through hell, and they are holding up well, all things considered." The following day, Daniel headed to IMC's headquarters to see the benefits department. The department head met him and, after expressing her sorrow, gave him a package containing Olivia's personal items from her workplace. Daniel had to swallow hard as he saw the framed family photo she had on her desk. The director then sent him to her expert for advice on Olivia's entitlements. The first step was to investigate Olivia's 401k account. Daniel had seen her yearly accounts on a frequent basis, so the ultimate sum came as no surprise. However, it was far greater than he had anticipated. Olivia seems to have increased her payments to the plan over the past year, above the amount that the business would match. She was really trying to provide for her family, the doctor said with appreciation. The professional went on to urge Daniel to take the monies as quickly as possible and transfer them to his own IRA so that he could better manage them. Daniel was also surprised to receive a page describing his life insurance payout as Olivia's beneficiary. He discovered that Olivia had chosen the highest level of insurance for which he was entitled, with the accidental death multiplier. Daniel was astounded to learn that he would get almost 4 years' worth of Olivia's earnings. "The insurance company will pay that out in annual installments," the lady said. "Otherwise, the taxes would eat you alive." Of course, the corporation had to have a copy of Olivia's death certificate before it could pay out any compensation. But following the visit from the two agents, Daniel was optimistic that it would happen soon. Daniel exited the office building feeling relieved. He expected to have to start looking for a new job right away. He understood he had a large grace period to get his life in order. "Thank you, Olivia," he said fiercely to himself. Daniel was preparing supper for his family late one day several days later when the doorbell rang. When Daniel went to respond, he discovered Special Agent White had returned to his doorstep. After he invited her in, she explained the reason for her visit. "Mr. Adams, I wanted to inform you in person that our investigation is complete and your wife's death certificate has been issued. You should get a certified copy from the court within the following several days." Daniel breathed a sigh of relief. He had assumed there would be no complications, but it was reassuring to know that this vital work was completed. Just then, a frantic cry rang out from the rear of the house and Daniel was frightened to hear Sophia shout, "Help me, Dad! Help me!" He turned and dashed towards Sophia's room. White was hot on his heels, grabbing for the service handgun in the shoulder holster under her jacket. When Daniel entered Sophia's room, he saw his daughter looking at a huge crimson bloodstain on her trousers. "I am bleeding, Dad," she wailed. Daniel felt afraid. "Sophia, what happened? Have you cut yourself?" As he approached his daughter's side, a hand grabbed his elbow and jerked him back with startling force. "Let me handle this," White replied forcefully, pushing him to the door. "But Daniel objected. The young lady refused to be transported. "You'll manage it, Daniel. Simply walk out into the living room and wait." Something about the power in her voice gave him pause, and with the resolute young lady blocking his path, he took a timid step back into the corridor. White quietly slammed the door in his face. After 15 nervous minutes, the door opened and White emerged. Before Daniel could utter a question, she grabbed his arm. "Sophia's fine. You should go to the shop right now and get a packet of sanitary napkins. Get the smallest size they provide." "But, Sophia..." "Bobby," Daniel started to argue. "He'll look after Sophia and keep Bobby updated on the situation. You only need to go to the shop and return as soon as possible," she replied. As Daniel drove to a neighboring convenience shop, the revelation struck him and he started to berate himself. She began getting her menstrual period. "You fool, you should have understood it right away." On the return ride, he cursed himself for never discussing Sophia's growth into womanhood. "Oh, Olivia, I need you more than ever," he reflected in self-pity. When he arrived home, White greeted him at the front entrance and pulled the bag away. After inspecting the gift, she grinned. "You did good, Dad," she added before disappearing back into Sophia's room. After another 30 minutes, White emerged with her arm around Sophia, who remained slightly bashful. Daniel went to his knees and held his daughter as she approached him. "Oh, honey, I'm really sorry. I should have spoken to you about this long ago. I just didn't think about it." "It's okay, Dad," Sophia said. "I didn't know what was going on and I was afraid. Celia explained everything to me. I know what to do now." As she talked, she placed her hand in White's and Daniel understood his daughter had acquired a new friend. He rose and turned to face White. "Thank you so lot. It's a good thing you were present. I suppose I panicked for a moment." White smiled, but before she could respond, Liam appeared around the corner. "Just because my stupid little sister gets her first period, does that mean we won't have supper tonight? I am starving." Sophia screamed in outrage, but Daniel caught her before she could strike her older brother. "Liam, if you talk like that to your sister again, I guarantee you'll be going to bed hungry," Daniel told his little son. But before his warning became too serious, he added, "Now go wash your hands and set the table." He then turned back to White. "The least we can do is give you a supper for all you've done. It's not exactly gourmet cuisine, but there's enough to eat." The young lady was obviously ashamed. "Thank you, but I can't intrude." Her protests were cut short as Sophia yanked on her hand. "Please, Celia, please stay and eat with us." White smiled at her new buddy and said, "All right, Sophia, just for you." She looked up at Daniel and smiled again. "Thank you. I would love to eat supper with your family." When the four of them sat down to eat, White became the object of several inquiries from the two youngsters regarding her law enforcement background. Daniel ate and listened, amused by his children's interest and admiring White's ease with their queries. He instantly understood that this was the first time the two of them seemed to have broken free from their sadness. After dessert, Daniel sent Liam and Sophia out to finish their schoolwork and gave White a cup of coffee. As the two of them sat at the table, Daniel had the opportunity to ask his own inquiries. "You seem to get along well with Liam and Sophia. Do you work with a lot of young people?" She grinned. "Actually, I come from a large family with 2 brothers and 3 sisters. I was the eldest, so I suppose I was second mom to the rest of kids." She stopped to take a drink of her coffee before continuing. "That is how I knew what to do with Sophia this afternoon. I got to walk each of my sisters through the trauma of puberty." She smiled at Daniel again. "For what it's worth, my dad was just as helpless as you were today." Daniel smiled shyly. "Well, all I can say is that I am delighted you happened to be here. Even when I knew what was going on, I wouldn't have known how to settle Sophia down that fast." She smiled to thank him, then became very serious. "How are they dealing with the death of their mother?" she asked. Daniel sighed. "About as well as can be anticipated, I believe. Sophia has become really clinging. I believe she is lacking the feminine influence. It's difficult to say what will happen to Liam. Has been moody and reclusive, but I'm not sure whether it's because of Olivia's death or just because he's a teenager now." White stared at him kindly. "From what I've observed, I believe you're doing an excellent job with him. It will take time, for both them and you." After that, she rose up and said, "I sincerely liked the supper, Daniel, but I've intruded on your family long enough. I need to get moving. But if it's okay, I do want to say farewell to Sophia and Liam." Daniel nodded, and she moved down the hall. He heard her say goodbye to Liam and spent a few minutes in Sophia's room. Sophia reappeared, her arm around White's waist. "She really has made a new friend," Daniel thought in amazement. A few days later, a gift came via mail. When his ecstatic daughter ripped open the package, she discovered a pink toy elephant and a message from White. Daniel was pleased with the care, yet amused with the pic. Sophia is too old for plush animals, he thought. But he was astonished to find the toy in such a prominent position on Sophia's bed. "I suppose there's still some young girl left in her," he admitted. The next day, he contacted White's office to thank her. "I never would have thought of that," he admits. But somehow, it was just the right thing for Sophia. White was overjoyed that his daughter was satisfied with her present, and Daniel promised to remain in contact and let her know how Liam and Sophia were doing. A few weeks later, Daniel was paying bills one morning when he received a call from Liam's homeroom instructor. "I'd like to meet with you to talk about your son," the instructor informed Daniel. "He's having some discipline problems in school." Daniel agreed to meet with her the following day, but he chose not to say anything to Liam that night. He wanted to wait till he understood what was going on before facing his kid. The meeting was scheduled for the next day after class. While the students were in PE, Mrs. Taylor, the homeroom teacher, informed the worried parent that Liam's conduct in class had deteriorated in recent months. "I didn't want to say anything at first because I know he's been through so much," the instructor stated. "However, it seems to be growing worse. He has gotten more disconnected from his lessons. He's not finishing his homework, and his other professors say he's not paying attention in class. He's done so well up until now, but his grades are likely to fall this semester if he doesn't do anything to change things." Daniel was worried. "Mrs. Taylor, how much do you think being a teenager has to do with this?" "There's no question, that's a tough age for kids, especially boys," she said to him. "But we're used to it. I believe his mother's loss is impacting him more than he may have revealed to you. You may want to consider getting him some therapy." Daniel thanked the lady and went to his vehicle, waiting impatiently for his children to complete their gym sessions. He was concerned to hear of Liam's troubles and was resolved to have a lengthy conversation with the youngster. When Daniel brought Liam and Sophia home, he sent Sophia to her room to do her schoolwork before leading Liam into the master bedroom. The boy's face clouded. He realized he was in danger. Daniel described his interaction with Liam's homeroom teacher and highlighted some of the examples she gave him. What is going on, Liam? Why are you behaving like this? Daniel commanded. No reason, the youngster said sullenly. Come on, you're smarter than that, his father said. Aren't you concerned about your grades? Not really, Liam said. Daniel was irritated by his son's lack of attentiveness, so he attempted to shame him into responding. What would your mother think if she knew you were messing up? Daniel inquired. Who cares? Liam responded fiercely. She was such a witch. In amazement and indignation, Daniel seized his kid and shouted at him, Don't ever talk about your mother that way. How do you say such a thing? Liam blurted out, I saw her, out of fear of his father's fury and agony from his firm hold. I witnessed her screwing that man. As soon as the words left his lips, Liam sank into the bed and sobbed. In surprise, Daniel sat next his kid, wrapped his arm over him, and cradled him like a young child. It's all right, he said again, attempting to soothe the boy's apparent distress. When Liam's weeping stopped, Daniel raised his son's head. It's okay, Liam. I am not furious at you. Please tell me what you observed. The youngster gazed at him with tears in his eyes. It was last autumn. You let me ride my bike to school one day, but I missed my math homework, so I slipped out at lunch and came home to retrieve it. While I was hunting for it in my room, I heard Mom enter. I wanted to avoid being caught, so I hid. That is when I heard the man's voice. What man? Daniel inquired a bit too soon. I don't know, Liam said. Some guy I never saw before. That's okay, Daniel reassured him. Just tell me what happened next. They came in here, and it became quiet, so I figured I could slip away. But then I heard Mom make a strange noise, and I was afraid. So I peeked in and saw them on the bed. They were screwing. Liam's words came out of his lips quicker and faster, as if he was frantic to get them out. When he finished, he started crying again. Why did she do that, Father? How could Mom behave like such a witch? Daniel felt emotionless as he listened to his son's narrative, but he didn't have time to process his own feelings. His kid needed him. I understand, Liam. It's all right. I'm sorry you had to watch that, Daniel murmured softly. But I'm glad you told me. He gently grabbed his kid by the shoulders and turned him around to face him. People we love may make errors or do things we don't like. That is not to say we no longer adore them. It just indicates that we dislike what they did. I'm not sure why your mother would do that, son, but I know she loved you and Sophia very much. I want you to remember her for the excellent things she did. Daniel held his kid and spoke to him for a little longer. When he believed the youngster had calmed down enough, he gently persuaded him to do his schoolwork while Daniel went to the kitchen to prepare supper. Before Liam departed, Daniel joined him. Say nothing to Sophia, he instructed the kid. I won't, Dad, Liam assured, and Daniel was reasonably convinced that his son would keep the unpleasant news from his sister. The remainder of the evening went by without incident, but when the kids went to bed, Daniel's emotions erupted. His immediate instinct was to dispute what Liam had told him. My son must have made a mistake or misconstrued what he saw. But he couldn't keep that reasoning up for long. His son had been too traumatized by the encounter, and Daniel had to acknowledge that a teenager nowadays would undoubtedly identify sex when he saw it. Daniel's thoughts were harsh after that revelation. How could Olivia betray me? He had believed they had a nice marriage. How could she have cheated someone on the side? For that matter, who was the other man? How long did the affair last? It's difficult enough to lose your wife in a plane crash, he reflected in sadness. It's terrible to find you lost her much earlier. Sleep was slow to come that night. The following day, Daniel felt depressed. It was Tuesday, a day he would regularly go to the gym, and after the kids left for school, he decided to stick to his schedule for a bit. The exercise helped to distract his focus, but once he got on the treadmill, his thoughts returned to his wife's adultery. How could Olivia have accomplished that? And in our own beds? He questioned himself. Somehow, the setting exacerbated the betrayal. How did she know I would not be home? The solution came to him instantly. It must have been one of the days when I visited the gym. I'm such a creature of habit, she would have assumed the place was empty. However, the solution to that inquiry quickly prompted others. If she organized her small assignment to work around my schedule, it doesn't seem like a spur-of-the-minute decision. How frequently did she see him there? It couldn't have been every week since her travel plans would have interfered. Each inquiry seemed to spawn another, exacerbating his misery. He tried to appear normal around Liam and Sophia, but he continued to suffer for the following 3 days. He found himself going to the pharmacist to get antacids, had never had stomach troubles before. His sadness was compounded by the fact that he had no one to speak to about his distressing finding. He definitely did not want to involve his parents or Olivia's. He knew the news would be upsetting for them. Similarly, he didn't want to speak with his pals and risk being the focus of gossip in the neighborhood. And I definitely don't want to risk having any of Liam and Sophia's classmates tormenting them, he thought. He felt entrapped. He was working at his desk one evening when he came across Nina Clark's business card. She advised me to contact her if I had any further information, he recalled, but in reality, he was looking for any reason to share his news with someone and get a different viewpoint. He dialed the mobile phone number she had placed on the card, and when he introduced himself, Celia seemed glad to hear from him. Her tone shifted to one of worry when he informed her he wanted to speak with her. "Are Liam and Sophia okay?" she inquired hesitantly. "They are," he answered. "But I'm not. Could you possibly join me for lunch tomorrow?" "This is not something I want to discuss over the phone," Daniel stated. Celia instantly agreed and offered a location near the Texas Bureau of Investigation headquarters, where she worked. "It's a quiet little place, we should be able to talk there," she told him. When he hung up, Daniel felt a bit better about the possibility of unburdening himself. Daniel entered the restaurant while Celia was waiting. She smiled in welcome, but it immediately faded as she noticed the painful look on his face. Celia couldn't take the anticipation any longer after they'd taken their seats and made their orders. "What has occurred, Daniel?" "You told me to let you know if I had any more information about my wife," he said. "Well, I don't know if this is relevant to your investigation, but I just found out that Olivia was cheating on me." Daniel felt embarrassed as tears streamed down his face as he said. Celia rushed across the table to take his hands. "Oh, Daniel, that's horrible," she remarked, her voice full of sorrow. "Tell me what happened." The whole narrative of Liam's encounter with his instructor, the fight with his son, and Liam's heartbreaking confession spilled out, stopped only by the delivery of their lunch. Celia listened silently and allowed him to relate the tale at his own speed. She only spoke after he had done. "For Liam," she added quietly, "it's no wonder has been behaving up at school. This must have been eating away at him since it occurred. It's no surprise that has been so torn since Olivia's death." She had released Daniel's hands when the waitress delivered their order, but now she reached across the table to grab him again. "I can hardly imagine what this has done to you, Daniel," she added gently. Daniel could sense pity in her eyes. "Is there any sign that anything went wrong?" she asked. "Now when you look back, can you notice any clues?" "No," he said. "I cannot claim I saw anything. You know what they say, the spouse is usually the last to know." He returned his gaze to Celia after briefly looking down at his untouched plate. "Ever since she earned her huge promotion, our sex life had dropped down rather significantly, but I believed it was acceptable given the stresses of her new work and travel schedule. I didn't like it, but I felt compelled to accept it for our family's sake. She kept telling me things would get better once she moved up to the national level, but," he hesitated. "I guess that wasn't to be." Then he scowled. "What's hurting me is that I have no answers. I'm not sure who the bastard she was sleeping with was. I'm not sure when their affair began or how long it had been ongoing. I'm not sure whether she was in love with the man or was preparing to leave me. Worst of all, I'm not sure why she would do that to me or the kids." Celia gripped his hands. "Please, Daniel, listen to me. The fact is that you are unlikely to ever get answers to your queries. You'll have to let it all go. All of this is irrelevant now that she has died. All you can do is concentrate on caring for your family and yourself." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know you're right, Celia, but it hurts so much to be deceived that way. It makes me wonder when she stopped loving me." "No," Celia answered vehemently. "You are mistaken. Whatever else transpired, Olivia clearly cared passionately about you and the children. Look what you discovered at IMC. She purchased the greatest amount of life insurance to ensure you were all covered. She maxed up her 401k contributions to save money for the future. I'm not sure what else transpired in her life, but they seem like compassionate gestures to me. Thanks, Celia, Daniel murmured gently. I'll try to remember that. As they rose to depart, Daniel glanced down at the table. Neither of them had touched their meals. I guess I'm not a very good lunch date, he told me. Don't worry about that, Celia said carelessly. Missing a meal or two is probably a good thing for me. Daniel gazed down at her thin form. She looks great, he thought. But then he realized he was thinking about her more personally. It's been a long time, he reminded himself. As they went out the door, Celia grabbed his arm. Please remain in contact, Daniel. Let me know if there is anything I can do. I truly want to assist. Then she reached up and kissed him on the cheek before turning away. Daniel believed he saw a flush on her cheeks as she went to her vehicle. Frank believed he saw a flush on Celia's cheeks. Frank was astonished to discover his mood had improved as he drove back home. I guess I really needed to get that off my chest, he reminded himself. The next Saturday, Frank spent the morning clearing up branches that had fallen in the yard during a storm. When he got inside, he saw Laurie conversing on the phone. He turned to Bobby, who was standing close, and said, "Did someone call?" "No," Bobby said dismissively. "She's just talking to her new BFF, Celia." Frank was astonished. "Does she call Celia often? And what's a BFF?" "Dad," Bobby said in frustration, "you're so out of it. BFF means best friend forever." Laurie just glanced up and spotted her father. "Daddy, can we ask Celia over for dinner?" Frank stretched his hand to grab the phone from her. "Let me talk to her." He grabbed his phone and said, "Hi, Celia. I guess you heard. Would you like to have dinner with Laurie tonight? Bobby and I will be here too." He heard her sweet giggle, then a swift assent. "Great," Frank said. "How about 6? After hanging up, Frank went to face his daughter. "She's coming," he told her, beaming. "I hope you're happy." "Oh yes, Daddy," Laurie said. "In that case, you and Bobby need to start straightening up around here," Frank told you. "We can't let her think we live like pigs." "Dad, do I have to?" Bobby protested. Before Frank could react, Bobby turned and began collecting the clothing he had left in the den. He's still a teenager, Frank reflected, but at least he's doing better. As Frank made his way to the kitchen, he began to consider what he should prepare for supper. Definitely something better than spaghetti and meatballs, he reflected, recalling the first time Celia had dined with him. After some thought, he decided on a fish dish, one of his specialties. It was something he felt comfortable producing, and the kids seemed to like it, which was always a bonus. Frank knew he needed to go food shopping to ensure the supper was flawless. He instructed Bobby and Laurie to remain inside while he went out. He discovered a lovely piece of fish in the seafood section and then stopped by the bakery for dessert. I should pick up a nice bottle of wine, Frank thought as he pushed his basket down the aisle. After choosing a suitable bottle, he went to the store's flower area and chose a bouquet for the table. On his drive home, Frank thought about what he was doing. "I'm really going all out for this meal," he reasoned. "I guess I owe Celia a good dinner. After all, I did ruin her lunch." Celia came at the scheduled time of 6. Before Frank could open the door, Laurie had already welcomed her, and to his astonishment, Bobby had also appeared. He was even nice, making some small chat. Frank, for his part, felt uneasy and inarticulate, but Celia seemed to ignore his discomfort, conversing pleasantly with Laurie. They both went to Laurie's room for a moment, and when they returned, supper was nearly done. The supper was tremendously successful. Celia complimented Frank on his culinary abilities, saying that her mother had cautioned her about men who could cook. Bobby and Laurie were both anxious to speak with her, and everyone seemed to be at comfortable. Following dessert, Celia insisted on assisting with the cleaning. After the dishes were done, Bobby went back to playing video games and Laurie settled down to watch one of her favorite programs. Celia and Frank refilled their wine glasses before moving to the living room. "Everything was wonderful," Celia said, her voice beaming. "I don't know when I've had such a good time. Thank you so much for inviting me. I think Laurie would never have spoken to me again if I hadn't come. Frank laughed and Celia joined in. She's a wonderful young lady, Celia said. And you're lucky to have her. Frank felt his cheeks flush, but before he could react, Celia's tone changed to more serious. In addition to having a lovely time, she told me, I'm glad you invited me because there's something I need to share with you. Frank lifted an eyebrow, seeing the change in her manner. This is highly confidential, Frank, Celia remarked quietly. But I feel like I can trust you and it concerns you indirectly. Frank sat up taller, his curiosity piqued. What is it? As you know, the FBI had to make a routine investigation before your wife's death certificate could be issued, said Celia. We found nothing that raised any red flags and the declaration went ahead. We did the same for John Kohler, but we found a few things that didn't quite add up. Frank felt his heart skip a beat. What do you mean? Well, Celia replied, it turns out John Kohler had been in financial trouble due to a series of bad investment decisions. And more recently, we uncovered irregularities in the accounting department at IMC, the very department John Kohler oversaw. It looks like there may have been a fraudulent invoicing scheme, potentially embezzling millions of dollars. Frank nodded, recalling Amanda's first doubts. Poor Amanda, he said sadly. She didn't deserve any of this. Indeed, Celia agreed. But it gets worse. We've recently learned that Kohler may have been involved in some illegal activities that could have caused his disappearance. It's possible that he was trying to cover his tracks when the plane went down. And we're investigating whether the crash could have been a way to hide the evidence. Frank felt a shiver go down his spine. Could John Kohler have had anything to do with the crash? He was unable to shake the notion. Celia stopped, allowing Frank to process the information. Look, she replied softly, it's still just speculation. The most likely explanation is that the crash was accidental, as we've been led to believe. But there are a lot of loose ends we need to look into. We can't jump to conclusions, and neither should you. Frank sat silent for a minute, although his thoughts were racing. Do you think Meredith could have known about this? Could she have been involved? The man questioned. Celia sighed. It's not impossible, she acknowledged. But it's highly unlikely. If she had been involved, it would have meant she was planning to abandon you and the kids. That's not typical behavior for a mother, especially one with children your age. Celia took a big breath. And unlike Kohler, Meredith had no financial problems. Her finances were actually in good shape. She didn't do anything that would suggest she was planning to disappear. Frank nodded slowly, attempting to digest everything. So what are we really looking at here? Questioned the man. We're still investigating, Celia said. But the one fact we do know is that Meredith's plane did crash at sea. We can't overlook that. Frank felt uneasy. He couldn't escape the sensation that something was hidden from him. Thank you for watching. What do you think will come next? Let us know in the comments and remember to like, share, and subscribe.